Hey, you, I was thinking about you. And you know what I was thinking? I was thinking it's time for you to soar. I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Have you ever felt like you were just burnt out? No such thing as balance, burning the candle at both ends? It's important that you understand the signs, you understand the symptoms, and you are able to move yourself to take care of yourself. And today's guest is going to share her story as well as relevant tidbits on how to make sure that you're living in a balanced life. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Daa'iyah Cooper. So, Dr. Daa'iyah, we're talking about balance, and some people think it's a myth, but tell me, was there ever a time in your life when you were out of balance and that you had to make a change? What
Oh,
did you do? And yeah, just talk to us about that.
ooh. Oh
Answer
my
that.
goodness, Katina. So, yes, the answer to your first question is emphatically yes. There's definitely been a time in my life, there's been a couple times in my life where I felt out of balance and I had to make a
Yeah.
change. So, just to give your audience a little bit of background, because I know you know my story, and a little bit about me since we've been blessed to be in community together. But for those who don't, my background is I am an ER doctor, and I worked for many years in academic emergency medicine, working at a teaching hospital, um, and working in a what people would call "quote unquote" an inner city. Worked in multiple inner cities, but working at a teaching hospital as an ER physician, providing care to people. And so that also includes the fact that I was working as an ER doctor during the pandemic, which really showed a lot of the inefficiencies of the healthcare system, and a lot of areas where it needed to improve. It just really revealed all of that. And so it made it not only for the fact that, I was working in an environment that was life threatening, always has been, obviously, because I'm working around communicable diseases and things like that, but even more so, especially at the first part of the pandemic, when we just didn't really know much about the virus. And so, on top of that, dealing with that plus all the new inefficiencies of the healthcare system that were coming out. So, lack of support, lack of PPE, so many different aspects of that situation threw me really into a world of burnout. I was able to work through that time early into the pandemic, the first few years. But a couple years into it, I just found myself super burnt out because one, I am managing at that time my clinical responsibilities as a physician, and I'm managing my teaching responsibilities as a physician at a teaching hospital. So not only am I doing a set of my work where I'm working clinically multiple days out of the week seeing patients, but I'm also trying to teach residents and medical students. And I was a director of the department at that time as well, because you know how our people are, especially Black women. We're always leading something, right? And so I had to write lesson plans and curricula and scenarios, teaching scenarios, clinical scenarios for the residents and medical students to learn. So I'm doing that, and that's just my work. I mean, I'm working at two different hospital sites, but then of course, you have your personal life. You have family members that you're loving on, you're supporting, you're pouring into. You have, and I also was a side hustler. I had a business. I had a real estate business that I was running, managing my own properties. I was managing $1 million real estate portfolio, right? So it was just so much happening at one time to the point where I started feeling not my normal self. And
Mm,
that's one thing that I like to always, now that I've thought back over that time, because while you're in it, it's kind of hard to
mhm.
really like parse out like what's happening, and you don't necessarily see it happening day to day. It You can go by months or even years before you realize, oh wait a minute, I'm not the same person, I'm not feeling the same way. And so for me, it was, I started recognizing that my mood was different. I was the type of doctor, and I'm still the same type of person that I just love a good kiki. I love I love variation. I love that was all of the beauty of being an ER doctor, like not knowing what's going to happen. You never know if someone's going to come in with, toe pain, or someone's going to come in cardiac arrest, and you're going to have to, like, press on their chest and try to bring them back to life. So I loved all that about it. I loved the characters that would come in. There would be a lot of people who were dealing with a lot of pressures. Maybe they didn't even have a place to stay, but they would come in laughing, joking, maybe even intoxicated, but we would just have a ball. Be like, come on in, we'll take care of you. And so that was the energy I always had. And I found myself after this period of burnout realizing that I'm short with people, I'm short with my colleagues, I'm short with patients. That's not my normal demeanor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a sign for me. And I think that's important that we understand the signs. I didn't notice it when it first started happening, but when it hit me, I was like, man, this is not typical for me. The other thing too is another sign that stood out for me was, I remember there came a time where before every time I would go to work, I would have to start talking to myself. I would have to like amp myself into even walking inside. I would be sitting in my car in the parking deck and I'd be like, you can do anything for 8 hours. You can do anything for 10 hours. You got this. And so it hit me then. I was like, I never had to do this before. Even on my hardest days working, even when I was in training as a newbie doctor and trying to learn how to be a doctor, and I would be dealing with, maybe surgeons who were, almost bullying you. Even back then, I didn't have to talk myself into each shift like was in this new period of my life where I was feeling burnout. And to me, that's when it hit me that something is not right here. I couldn't even label it as burnout at that time. But that's those signs, the realizing I'm short, I'm not my normal jovial self, realizing that I'm having to amp myself up, give myself a pep talk to go inside the
To
building.
do what you used to love. So let me just ask you, those of you watching, have any of you had similar signals and signs? Go ahead and type yours in the chat. Maybe she didn't hit on yours, but amping yourself up to do what you used to love, a loss of passion. Um, has anybody seen that? And also, if you saw it, how long did you go before you noticed that it was a sign? Dr. Daa'iyah, how long did it take before you realized, wait, I'm not myself?
To be honest, I don't even know the answer to that. I'm going to keep it real with you. I think when I did notice it, I'm sure it had been going on for months.
What does that look like in the body? Let's talk about that.
Yes, yeah, yes. And I'm so glad you bring that up, because I talk a lot about this with my clients. Because now I don't work, full time as a doctor. Actually, for almost 2 years now, haven't worked at all up until last month. When I started, I didn't want to lose my license. I still wanted to keep up my skills and my license, so I started picking up just contract work shifts, one or two a month. But because of that, my full-time job now is serving my clients. I am a coach. I'm a business coach. And so I tell them that a lot too, that whether you're an employee or in a leadership position or running a business, a real estate business, or any other type of service-based business, um, it's more than just the technical aspect of running it. It's also the
Mm-hmm.
emotions involved. And so I always explain to them to be aware of the signs of when you are feeling out of your normal kind of baseline. So I always explain to them that when you start feeling abnormalities in your body, give that to yourself as a sign that you may be about to feel, or maybe get into one of your, how should I say, defense mechanisms, maybe avoidance or something like that. So, for instance, when I start feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or burnt out, I typically start feeling like tired. And I could have slept. I could have slept for 8, 10 hours the night before. But for some reason, the sign in my body is I start feeling tired. So now that I recognize that when I start feeling tired and it doesn't make sense, then I stop and I say, wait a minute, Is this, are you tired, or is there something else going on? Is there something else going on that is causing you to feel this way? Also, I when I'm feeling like stressed, I've noticed that I carry that in my body, in like my neck area, my jaw area. And so I start feeling neck tightness, soreness. I've even had a pinched nerve when I was so stressed. Also, headaches, uncontrolled headaches. And so sometimes, now that I recognize that, I'll understand that, one, it could be something medical, and of course I can go to the doctor or whatever, get checked out. But at the same time, I also ask myself, Daa'iyah, are you stressed? Is there something
Mhm.
that you're not realizing that is stressing you? And I take a step back outside of myself and ask myself that question when I start feeling those feelings. So I always tell my clients to do the same thing. Like, start noticing when you are obviously stressed, where do you start feeling that in your body? And so when you start feeling that body sensation at some other time in the future, it's a forewarning that you're about to go down that path.
So we really need to know ourselves, understand the signs and the signals. Listen, everybody watching, do you know what your body does when your emotions are overwhelmed, overrun, headed toward burnout? And go ahead and type those in the chat. Um, and even mood swings, like you said, you were short with people, and you're like, wait, that's not really my regular demeanor. Um, all of this, when we're talking about soaring, when we're talking about getting, excuse me, getting unstuck, a lot of times, some things that have us stuck, we don't realize they're invisible. And it always helps to have somebody that's your confidant, that knows you well, that is able to give you a signal. So, um, with you, how was that challenging for you when you were going through that pivotal moment in life?
Yeah, it was. It was challenging for me. So now I have, even if they're not in person, virtually an inner circle of people that
Mhm.
I can connect with. But at that time, and even a lot now, a lot of my loved ones who are closest to me, especially since I don't have a partner at this time, um, they are in different like states, cities. And so there's a lot of professionals who may be living in a city away from their loved ones, away from their family members. And so if you don't have yet good girlfriends or good friends in that area, you may not have people who see you every day outside of your coworkers.
Mm.
So that's why it's also important, if you are in that type of situation, to make sure you have circle, even if it's virtually, and commit to checking in with them and they check in with you. Now, even still, if I'm living in a city where I'm far away from a lot of my family and loved ones, but I have my team of people that I work with. um, and even like my assistant, she recognizes like when I'm about to say something that seems a little off, like, I'm feeling a little tired. And she was like, oh yeah, yeah, I've noticed you saying, you've been saying you're tired a lot. Like, are you tired, or is that stress? Because I know you said sometimes you feel tired even when you're not sleepy, when you're stressed out. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you for saying that. You're right. Let me think on this. So sometimes it's good to, like you said, once you start labeling those things and you start recognizing the signs that you are about to go in, like down a pathway of stress or a pathway of burnout, you can let other people around you know. Even if it's your people virtually, you can let them know, like, this is like what happens to me whenever I start kind of veering down this path. Sometimes I notice it, sometimes I don't. If I don't notice it, just bring it up to me, and I promise I won't be upset. Just bring it up to me. So that has also been helpful.
Good. So now what do you do? Now we're looking, we're noticing, I'm headed toward burnout. What if I'm in a job, I'm in a role, and I am not my own boss?
Yeah. Yeah. I've experienced it kind of like the example that I gave you guys earlier. I've experienced it while I was working. I've also not experienced full burnout, but definitely felt myself going down that pathway of overwork, even after I retired early and started work, full-time self-employment. And so the solution for me in both of those situations was to set boundaries. To set boundaries.
Oh, wait, that's a word. Boundaries.
Do you guys talk
Boundaries.
about that a lot here with your audience?
Listen. That's a great word, but the challenge is many people don't know how to set them. So talk to us about boundaries.
Yeah, you have to, and sometimes you don't know it. Sometimes it's trial and error, but you know what your current situation is. It's not working. And it's not going to be sustainable. So, for instance, and I kind of shared this with one of my clients last night who still works full time. Um, you have to decide, like, okay, when I bring things, like for instance, like when I would bring work to home, I was like, I'm already stressed at work. Now I'm bringing the stress home. So I have to figure out a way to not bring work home. And one of the most common ways that I would bring work home is I would be doing charting, like patient charting. And so I decided, especially in those last couple years before I retired early, that I was going to do work at work and that's it. And I would be home at home. And so that meant that I needed to create a better way to make sure I got more efficient at my charting at work. And so before it would be this kind of unwritten rule that you need to move, 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 see patients, see patients, see patients. And I get it. Because that could be a normal feeling in an ER to feel rushed. But what I decided was that I was going to create my own rule and my own standard and not worry about other people's rules and standards. So I would create my own internal rule and standard. And my rule became, I see one patient, I write one note, I finish one chart. I see one patient, I write one note, I see one chart. And so that was just an example for me. And so, of course, there are going to be instances when you're in an emergency room where, like, if someone's coming in and their heart is stopped, you can't just go and write a chart. So if there are exceptions, I would say, okay, and my ultimate rule is I will never go past 3 patients before I start writing a chart. And so that allowed me to, once I start setting that boundary and decided what my own internal standard and value was,
Mhm,
or what I felt was professional for me,
mhm.
that allowed me to finish more work at work and then not bring it home, and it allowed me to leave on time too, compared to what I would do before is I would stay hours late, and so I would have even less time at home where I felt safe. So that was just an example of how I set boundaries and created my own internal barometer. And there would be times where I would be, going to see a patient and I would come back and follow my rule of writing a note, but there would be someone new to be seen. Now, of course, they weren't having like an emergency where I needed
Crisis.
to rush to the room or
Right.
crisis, but they were in an ER, so technically, they felt like it was an emergency. And so there were times where other people would look at me like, oh, she's just sitting there writing and there's someone to be seen. And so I decided to be okay with that. I decided to be okay with if people were looking at me, even if they had the audacity to say something, which they most likely didn't. But even if they did, I would be like, okay, I'm going to still write this note and then I'll get to them. And ultimately, it actually end up being better for patients because I'm writing notes quicker. I'm more thorough when I'm writing them because it's fresh on my brain than trying to do it hours later after I've seen 10 people.
I love all of that because it speaks to mindset. You have to decide to prioritize yourself. The challenge that many people have, and listeners, if I'm right, you say you're right. Um, a lot of times we don't feel that we have the autonomy to prioritize ourselves. We don't feel like we're empowered to prioritize ourselves. But to be honest, and this sounds so blunt, if you get sick
Hmm.
and cannot do the job, cannot fulfill the responsibilities because it still needs to be done, that organization will find someone to do what needs to be done.
Sure will.
And so many people have had their feelings hurt because they're like, I gave all my blood, sweat, and tears. I gave all of me to
Mm-hmm.
an organization. And the minute I am unable to fulfill what I used to fulfill, you've
Mm-hmm.
replaced me.
Replace. Expendable.
Expendable. So listen, listeners, if you don't hear anything else, I need you to hear me say prioritize yourself
Mm-hmm.
before it's too late. You already typed
Absolutely.
in what the signals are. So now you need to set boundaries and some. I love how you put that, internal standards. Like these are my personal standards. Maybe it's 2 patients, 2 charts. And then what you said was the patients got the best of you,
Mm-hmm.
both in the records and then when you're fresh for the next patient.
Yes, yes, yes. So And then it's so funny because it's like I was bumping, like I was like going against the status quo, or it may not even have been the status quo. Sometimes there's so many unspoken rules, and things are
Mm,
taboo and it's not really said, it's not even really written somewhere,
expectations.
but you feel it like if you're doing something different than how other people are doing it. And I just became okay with that. I just decided, just like, those people, like, they can be like, oh, she's just sitting there, she's spending 7 whole minutes typing a note, instead of she could have seen that patient in 7 minutes. And so I decided to be okay with that, and that's another thing that you're gonna have, and that comes from like deciding what your personal value is, like your personal, like my personal definition of professionalism. And so, of course, like, don't do anything to get yourself fired, but sometimes some of those like unwritten, unspoken rules that cause us to devalue ourselves and
Mm,
to lose our boundaries, um when you actually go against those, sometimes you actually will find that it there's nothing that anyone can do about it, because it's not even written anywhere that you should do it that way. It has just been kind of like an unwritten rule that pushed you to start doing things that way, like pushing you to overwork. And be careful about setting those standards for yourself, that overworking, especially if you're new at a place, because people are going to start to expect it from you. And then when you stop doing it, then they're going to resent you. So just also be careful about that. Like, do your job, do what's documented in your contract. When you start going above and beyond, no one's going to give you like a Twinkie for that. To be like, I had to learn that as well. Like, I had to learn that. Like, no one's going to give you anything for going above and beyond.
so you're saying we should push back when we're finding that the unspoken rule, the unspoken expectation, um, there's no rule for it. It's not written. It's not part of my job description. But it's like, who else is going to get it done?
Yeah.
And we then take ownership. And I
Yes.
remember I was in an organization where the work had to get done. It couldn't get done in the quote unquote allowable hours,
Mhm.
and no one ever said you're going to get fired if you don't get it done.
Exactly.
But there was a fear
Mhm.
to say this is not sustainable, it's not
Mhm.
healthy for me, because you're
Mhm.
thinking of perception. What are people
Mhm.
going to think about me? What are they going to say about me? Is it going to impact my job? But I go back to another job, another role. Even if you switch careers, you can do that, but you can't get another you.
Yes. You know what helped me with that, Katina? Because I just want to double click on everything you said, because it echoes what I'm saying about you deciding what your own personal value is, or what your own personal definition is of professionalism when it comes to anything that's outside of what's documented in your contract. Because there are going to be things that are brought to you for you to do, or you're going to feel the urge to work on things that are outside of your delineated job duties, and you get
Mm,
to decide which of those you do based off of like your idea of professionalism. So I definitely want to double click on that. And there was something else I wanted to say. It slipped my mind. It'll come back to me. We're just talking about so many good things, but it'll come back to me of what I wanted to say too. But definitely just want to reiterate the idea of anything outside of your work duties, your delineated contract duties, you get to decide if you're going to do them or not, because you get to decide what your idea of professionalism is for you.
mm. That's such a great nugget. How many of you out there are feeling helped? I I wish someone had told me sooner that what I was doing was lowering the standard and allowing people to treat me in a way that didn't prioritize me or my health
Mm.
or my family or my balance. And so hopefully you're feeling helped by this. I happen to know your story and I know you pivoted.
Yeah. And before we get to there, it came to me what I wanted to say too. What helped me with deciding what my own standard was going to be, or my own like measuring stick of what professional is for me, especially for those things that are outside of what's delineated in my contract. What really helped me with that is to really also like think about, like, what is my identity? Sometimes our identities are so wrapped up in our professions, if you guys are there are other doctors here listening, especially for us as physicians, because society puts so much into the identity of a physician or doctor. And so I had to also decide and reevaluate what my identity was. And then, more importantly, what my innate value is outside of the different identities that I had. That's what really helped me to decide that measuring bar of what I felt was my personal standard, my professional standard, because I start separating my value from being a physician and
Mm,
thought more about my value just as a human being, as a child of God. But in so many different aspects of our life, in our professional circles, our profession, our degree, our board like commitments, the different social circles we're in, the social commitments we have, the different groups we're a part of, memberships we're a part of, we may have different titles. And with those different titles, mom, sister, girlfriend, soror, member, chair member, council member, chairperson, all these different things come with an identity. And you have to be careful with how you, as well as society, consciously and subconsciously puts value with that identity. You have to decide what your innate value is, um, even if you still find value in that identity. Devaluing some of that and recentering the value, like devaluing some of that value that people put on being a doctor, and centering that value on, like, I'm just valuable just because I'm Daa'iyah, I'm a human being, I'm a child of God, and God made me before He formed me, before I was in the womb. You know what I mean? Because I recentered on that, that also helped me to set boundaries at work.
mm. So it's not only a mindset that, okay, I have to do something and I have to make a decision to do something. It's a mindset about who am I and finding our
Right.
identity,
Right. Because a
separating
lot of
you are
those
not your
fears,
job, you
Patina,
are not your career.
exactly. A lot of those fears, you're like, oh man, if I don't go above and beyond, I might not get promoted and I may not do
Mm,
this. And of course, I understand you have to pay bills. We're not telling you to do things that are going to keep you from being a good employee
mm,
or a good steward of this job and this, career that God gave you. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that some of those fears that you may have may be associated with losing that identity. Like, oh, what am I if I'm not this chairperson, or if I'm not
mm.
this? Or just be careful about that and just seek that question in yourself. Like, are some of my fears about like not living up to that standard is because I will de-identify with that position? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That is so helpful. Um, Listen, my passion is to make sure people soar, that they get to their next level. And a lot of things that are invisible snags are our mindset, how we think and value ourselves. An invisible snag is when I have allowed myself to be devalued over time. And I'm in this rat race, I'm in this cycle, meeting expectations that are unspoken to the detriment of my identity and my body
Mm.
and my mental health. So thank you for all of those. When you pivoted,
Hmm.
talk to the people about your pivot and
Oh,
what
yes.
you did, what you're doing, and how it feels on the other side.
Yes. So many people tell me I'm courageous. Oh my God, you're courageous. You're just fearless, because I just resigned from my job without like a lot of notice. But the reality is, I mean, I guess it did take a level of courage, but it was more so out of the fact that even with me setting some boundaries, the system just kept getting more and more crazy. It wasn't a normal work environment, and it became unsafe because I started having like physical symptoms. I was having headaches. And on top of that, having daily headaches, I could not create time for myself. The schedule just got crazier. It just became a little bit outside of, not a little bit, a lot of bit outside of the normal realm of like what this job entailed. Like it was becoming um way far away from what I signed up for years prior. So I was like, okay, they're not going to correct it. So I'm just going to have to leave. And thank God I had the ability to leave because I set a foundation on real estate investing. It wasn't enough to cover all my expenses, but I knew if I could add just a couple $1,000s to it a month that I would be able to live the same lifestyle. So once I had that kind of like evaluation of my situation where I thought about, okay, what resources do I have? What's happening now? I've set boundaries. It got better, but it's still got better on my end, but it's still getting worse on my employer's end. Things are not improving. So it's either me or them. Either I'm going to continue to work here, feel worse, get burnt out, or I'm going to leave. So after I had that revelation, a few days later, I resigned. And it's been amazing. It's been tough, but it's also been amazing. So it's been both since I left. I have one experienced freedom, but at the same time, especially that first year out of clinical medicine, I found myself running into overwhelm a little bit. Not all the way to burnout, but I started feeling overwhelmed because in my mind I was like, oh man, I was working all these hours clinically and now I have all this free time. So I started adding a lot of things on my plate, making a lot of promises to different people, making a lot of promises to my clients. And I found myself in a position where I was like, "Ooh, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed here. It's getting familiar to what I just left over a
Mm-hmm.
year ago, and I don't ever want to get back to there where I'm feeling that way." So although I felt very free, and I feel extremely free, but the first year it was a little bit of trial and error because it was nice for a while, but then I started adding so many things to my plate that I almost put myself back into burnout again. But what worked for me was I started setting boundaries and standards and getting consistent. I started adding structure. So before it was boundaries with my boss, but I still had to create boundaries with my boss this time after I pivoted, but the boss was me. So I had to tell myself, Daa'iyah, you have to be careful what you say yes to because every yes is a no. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And it's usually the no you're saying to something for yourself and your health. And so that was one thing I had to remind myself of. Two, I decided to create some more structure. When I pivoted from working as an employee to being fully self-employed, I didn't have the structure anymore. So I had the first time in my life I had to create my own structure. And so I decided, okay, on Mondays, it's going to be a CEO Sabbath. I'm not going to do any tenant facing work on Mondays. I'm not going to do any client coaching on Mondays. On Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Friday, well, not even really Fridays, but Thursdays and Saturdays, I will do client facing work. And on Sundays, I'm going to make sure that is my day to rest and actually have a Sabbath and focus on God because I never had that option before as an ER doctor. As a Christian ER doctor, I had to work on Sundays, right? And so I told myself that was going to be my structure. I would have a CEO Sabbath on Mondays and I would have my actual Sabbath on Sundays. And even on the days that I am coaching, I created a standard of, okay, this is the time of day that I'm going to be coaching. I'm not going to be coaching all day, all evening. And I set that boundary. And at first, I was a little bit afraid that the clients would have a problem with it, but they follow the leader. And so I set the standard and it works out well. So I made sure I baked in time to go to networking events. So I don't coach my clients on Thursday evenings because I know that's when there are different professional events here in the city where I live. I know that there's usually some type of socialization going on that I need to be available for. I also make sure that I don't have work to do on Friday afternoons or evenings, as well as Saturday evenings, because as someone who travels a lot for business, going to conferences, learning new things, as well as someone who's a single woman at this time, I want to make sure I have that freedom to do that. So again, I create a structure. So my clients know when I'm going to message them back, they know when I'm not going to message them back. So creating some structure and some standards for myself of what, now that I'm my own boss, what is professional for me now as a self-employed person.
Oh, that is powerful. And how long would you say it took you to kind of get into that rhythm?
A year. Probably a
A year.
year. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
listeners,
probably a year.
don't let that overwhelm you. just take a moment and think of all that's been said and see what you can commit to. Type it in the chat. What are you willing to commit to move to this freedom where you've got boundaries and you're still producing without the overwhelm? What are you willing to do? You have given incredible insight into that.
Yeah.
And, how many of you watching are actual physicians? Just type that in the chat.
Hey
Um,
y'all.
so you can most likely relate. And if you don't mind, Daa'iyah, can you tell us what it is that you do, how you service your clients, and how
Yeah.
people can get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
Yeah. So I am, of course, I'm a physician by education and training, but I'm, of course, I retired early, as we talked about earlier. So I may pick up a shift here or there, but for the most part, my main thing now is I'm a landlord. I'm a business coach, and I help people through two arms of my coaching business called Dynasty League, which is an umbrella from my general wealth building brand, which is Capital Dynasty. And so what I do is I help people gain wealth and time freedom. Specifically on the creative real estate investing side, I help people buy their first or next investment property in 6 months or less, which allows them to learn the skills needed to be able to buy properties frequently without spending a lot of money out of pocket. So they save tens of thousands of dollars and they make tens of thousands of dollars. And so that gives them a framework that they can go out and use with me. And once they finish my program and just, build their millions of dollars of portfolio, which will allow them to be free in a matter of just a couple of years so they can become work optional. And I help the other arm of my Dynasty League business. I help them do that as well in their service-based business, start and grow their service-based businesses by helping them with their sales, their marketing, and their offer.
Fantastic. The link is in the description where you can reach Dr. Daa'iyah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You have given us such wisdom and insight. We're grateful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing. And we're excited that you're back. You're not short. You're you're in a healthy space. So thank you
Yes.
for helping us get into a healthier space.
Oh, I'm delighted. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to share. Thank you so much for you guys' attention and just being a great audience.
Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast with Dr. Daa'iyah when she's sharing about the unbalance and the overwhelm that can often happen, but the way that you pivot and get unstuck. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it. Make sure you like it. And hopefully you've already subscribed to the It's Time to Soar podcast, because I can't wait to get unstuck with you. Take care. And remember, I was thinking about you.